Hello, we are live. We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Indiecade Beyond Screens Alternative Controller Show. My name is Alistair, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Tatiana.
Hello. And in this show, we invite creators of ALT+CTRL video games to tell us about their work and show us what they're working on.
So, for those of you who may be new to the world of ALT+CTRL, these are video games made to be played using unusual custom-made controllers. For example, a game might be made using a door stopper, or perhaps an electric guitar, or maybe even a paper shredder. Or the creator might build a totally new object made by soldering together their own electronic components.
And today's guest is Kaho Abe. Kaho is a game designer and media artist from New York City, but she's currently based in Osaka in Japan. She creates playful experiences, games, and custom controllers with the hope to bring people together in new ways.
Now, it's very early in Japan right now, but we had the privilege of interviewing Kaho a few days ago. So we're going to stream that interview we recorded for you now, and then Kaho's going to join us for a Q&A. So do type in your questions during the interview. We'll be in the chat. And when she joins us live on air in about 90 minutes, we'll ask them to her.
And as well as that, we'll also have our show and tell and our usual end of the show creative game. But before we go to the interview, let's take a look at one of her projects to give you a feel of her work. And this game is Hit Me.
Well, Tatiana, do you want to handle the welcome? I'll count us in 3, 2, 1, and you sort of say welcome to the show, and we'll kick off from there. So, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the show. Hi, Kaho. How are you?
Hi,
Thanks for
good.
joining us.
Hello.
How are you doing? You having a good day?
Yep. I'm doing pretty well. Well, how are you both?
Doing well, thanks.
Great. It's breakfast here. I got my orange juice. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited about this. We wanted to invite you for quite a while. We've been talking about this for quite a while. I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Nice. We briefed you on the show, so you know that we will start by talking a bit about what you did before starting to do custom controllers and alternative controllers. And from what I got, you were into fashion design. You did fashion design in Parsons. Am I correct on this?
Yeah, I did fashion design before I did game design, and I actually went to graduate school to learn how to embed like electronics into clothing, because I thought that that would be like a nice sort of area to explore since I always liked technology so much. And then during the program there, the design and technology program, but I stumbled upon game design and started studying game design there, and it was just like the perfect sort of combination of all these things that I love. Thinking of things in terms of systems and like, and at the same time, there's like such a creative aspect to it, and a lot of logical thinking involved. It was just like fun to build stuff, and so it was just like I was so excited and very lucky to sort of stumble upon it. And that program was amazing. There, basically, to learn about games and such. And so, yeah, it was definitely like a life-changing kind of moment. And then by the end, for my thesis, I did a wearable tech project, but I also made like the first iteration of Hit Me, which I picked up later to work on more. But yeah, that's the first time I started making stuff in games.
Mm. We'll talk about Hate Me later, because it's the first game I played from you. Actually, it was in Paris in 2012 for an exhibit titled Play Along. But yeah, let's not be so quick. So did you work as a more traditional fashion designer before that?
Yeah, I worked for some global labels, and so I did work in fashion. I worked for different places, women's wear and then menswear, and then a little bit in children's wear as well. But definitely, like that was my career. Yeah.
Mm. And what was your typical day as a fashion designer?
Oh, I mean, it's actually a really intense job,
Okay.
because you're releasing clothing lines like at least 4 times a year and such, and so there's like all this seasonal time pressure of like designing things. But a lot of it would be like designing stuff and like figuring out color palettes and like inspiration, and then designing the actual pieces of clothing, and also like sketching them so that other people understand what it is that you're thinking of, and that it can be eventually manufactured and created, and so that kind of thing.
That's really interesting, because from the skills required to do more traditional fashion design, there are a lot of skills there that you use in your games. I assume, at least based on your portfolio. So what did you take from there to the game world?
That's interesting. There's definitely like a lot of similarities between fashion and technology in the sense that there's a lot of things about trends and stuff, but there's like a really really functional aspect of clothing as well as technology. And just like understanding that both things, and like being able to apply that knowledge to the things that you make, right? So that there's context, that things make sense in a way, that you're creating something that is part of a discussion, right? Design wise. And so in that sense, like, I think they're very connected and similar. But definitely like aspects of just like having fun with things that you're designing. I think that fashion is actually really playful in a lot of ways, and there's like a whole storytelling aspect of it that I think is like that you can really bring into games easily as well. And so there's a lot of things like that, I think, that I was able to bring over. And of course there's like tech, what is it, like techniques and stuff. So you know, if I'm making a costume, you know, that's a game controller or something like that. Of course, like I can use like sewing and you know, and thinking about soft circuits and the way that fabric like moves on the, you know, human body, things like that. And especially with costumes, it's like, you know, you have to know the materials and like the characteristics of the materials and such. And so it's very there's a lot of like influence definitely from the fashion side for the things that I make. And yeah, and so there's definitely like similarities like that, and definitely like areas that transfer over, I guess.
Well, you mentioned your thesis for your MFA in design and technology. So after fashion design, you did design and technology, and this is where you started to embed technology, or at least it's the first things in your portfolio that mentions this. And we have back in 2005 project of yours like the Sleep Station, that were part of your master thesis, that were obviously foreshadowing Hit Me and Merrimack 5000. We'll talk about this later, but how did you come up with the idea for the Sleep Station and things like this, like discrete interfaces, etc.?
So for me as a fashion designer, like at the time, the wearable tech that was, you know, that was sort of existing at the time was like, you know, how you can listen to music. So you'd had like a play button and a fast forward button on your snowboarding jacket, so you can listen to music as you're, you know, snowboarding down a hill or something like this. And so there was like there were aspects like that where, you know, the cool thing was the fast forward and play buttons on the sleeve of the snowboarding jacket. But for me, like one of the biggest, you know, problems to solve in design, especially for fashion, is that like, you know, people want to wear different things, and you know, and sticking forward button on your sleeve is disrupts sort of maybe the fashion statement that you may have. And you know, in fashion, you know, we can sort of roll our eyes about like what fashion is or something, but it's a really important thing that that communicates a lot of things about your what you're trying to, who you want people to perceive you as in society, right? So like when you go to work or something, you might dress a certain way. You might go to a party, you might dress a certain way. Like this is all part of like the way we sort of communicate socially through our clothing. And so for me, it's like, how can, you know, you integrate like aspects of technology in there without taking away from those statements. And so I just wanted to create some different interfaces that basically, the concept was exploring fashion as the interface for the technology that you're carrying. So, you know, if it's like back then it was an MP3 player that a lot of people would carry around. And so how can you still be true to your fashion while being able to control these devices like from the surface, right? And so really thinking about clothing as an interface to the technology, and what it might look like as you switch through different kind of interfaces, as you change your outfit, right? But you always keep the same MP3 player. So like what kind of what sort of modular system can be created from that? And so that was my basic like exploration back then.
So the example that we've got up on screen right now is, so this was the sleeve station. So I guess that's a kind of, I guess one of your answers to this question. And so I understand what you were doing was embedding the buttons and sensors to control the MP3 player in buttons and, toggles and things that would exist in the garment anyway, even if it wasn't kind of technologically corrected. Have I got that right?
Yes, exactly. So, the visual language of clothing, not to interfere with that. So using existing accessories that you find on clothing already. So like definitely buttons, not as in push buttons, but like clothing buttons, right? Or like using capacitive switches on like metal surfaces like that are snaps and stuff like that. And so and sort of experimenting with those kind of things that you normally find on clothing anyways.
Yeah.
And this turned into discrete interfaces, which was an evolution of the sleeve station. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's a full garment like demonstration of the concept, but yeah.
And the relationship between music and clothing is something you explored a lot at the beginning of your experiment between clothing and technology. You had around the same time haptic music gloves, I guess, and the concept was a bit different, but we could see where you were going with interaction, especially on the glove. And well, it was clearly foreshadowing Marimac 5000. At least this is what it looks like from an exterior point of view. Not that it's the only experiment you made with sound, but this one was between clothing and sound. Can you tell us a bit about this? How did you come up with the haptic music gloves idea and project?
So Jung Xing was my collaborator on that, and this was originally her concept, and it was a really cool idea, I thought, where we're just touching hands with another person is just such a communicative gesture, right? Like giving somebody a high five or like shaking hands with people. And so so sort of working off of that, like what kind of interactive experiences we could take, but she is of Korean descent, and I'm of Japanese descent, and so like we kind of understand, I think, like not having language issues and things like that, and so like this aspect of this like physical touch and like looking straight at your friend's face and stuff as you're doing this, and the communication that happens with that, and then also through sound when you're making that contact, and so that was like really fun to do, and and I think all of these kind of things, like a lot of the work that I do, I think is so is exploring like the way that people communicate with each other a lot of times, and like it's like really interesting to me because there's so many things that happen that I can't predict as a designer, that this kind of stuff will happen between people, and so like something like that is just like which is really fun to make because it's like people, maybe they already know each other and they're doing this, or maybe, they've never met each other before and they're like, clasping hands and stuff. And like, so with that kind of emergent sort of, spontaneous behavior is just like so interesting to me.
Go ahead, Tatiana, go ahead.
Okay, I was about to say like, and from what I understand, haptic music gloves, the interactions in this are emerging from the players. And 5 years later in Merrimack 5000, it's actually ruled over, like there are rules for these interactions. So you turn this into a game. I guess at least this is how it looks like. Is this the process you went through?
Yeah, also like for Merrimack 5000, there's definitely aspects of these kind of clapping games that are, that we often saw little girls playing when we were little. I definitely played them, but I guess for me it was actually really funny because also during that time like rhythm games were really in, and I was like, this is the same exact thing. It's about accuracy and timing. So these rhythm games and these little girls clapping games are very similar. So I just wanted to bring that up, and of course like that kind of relationship that happens between the players, it was just like fascinating again to see. Like there was a I remember that at this festival that there were people who were like actually practicing the clapping gestures before they actually played the game, and there were just like groups of people like practicing patty cake type of claps and stuff. It was so interesting to see.
Clapping athlete.
Yeah, exactly.
But you also get an interesting thing with the kind of the costuming in Merrimack, because I guess it's not just kind of haptically sensitive sensors, and we had a look at the website, and the way that you achieved that was really interesting. But like the costuming of, it's not just the sensors. The sensors are in a denim jacket embroidered with patches and things, so it looks very kind of metal, and that brings a kind of an attitude to it, a kind of a danger. You describe it as not your little sister's patty cake, which I think is a really interesting thing. I mean, there's a level of kind of theatrics to it, and is that something that kind of had developed out of the experiences that you'd had with fashion design?
Definitely. Like, I mean, again, like the way that people communicate through their clothing is always really interesting. And the kind of feel, like the way that you want people to think of you, right? It's not necessarily the way that we're thinking. Like nobody really, what's that expression, wearing your heart on your sleeve? Like nobody really wants people to know what they're thinking of. At least that's my understanding of human beings. Is but like you put certain clothes on because you want to create that image, right? In a way, it's not something, I'm not saying that it's like dishonest or something, but it's like it is a form, it is part of that communication, I think. And so I think that it was just funny to me to make these kind of metal, rocker vests and things, and have people wear them and like realize and hopefully make that connection as they're playing it, that this is like a little girl's game, but it's also like this rhythm game that everybody's so excited about, like the Guitar Hero and Rock Band, like those all have this like rock attitude, but it's like rhythm games are everybody plays rhythm games, really.
So I also thought the way that the vest kind of communicates with the other vest in terms of, you know, what which hand is being used, which sensor is being connected to. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, could you describe that to our viewers?
Yeah. Let me see if I can remember how it's done. But if I remember correctly, so when two people are playing with each other, there's four hands in total, and each hand glove had a unique voltage ID, and there were a bunch of switches built into the console. And what the switch allowed was, for each glove to take a turn um, reading an input, voltage input from whatever it was in contact with. And so this would happen so fast. So the reading glove would like switch around between the four gloves like very, very fast. So there was an almost simultaneous reading of which glove is coming into contact with which glove, and then it would create a combo, or it is able to create some kind of clapping combo of that moment. And essentially the game is like looking for, is following a master list of the combos that are supposed to be happening at certain moments in time. So there's a list of like timestamps and the clapping combo, and the game is constantly like trying to see if it can recognize that combo within the combos that the players are making. And if they happen, then it also then measures like how far off or how accurate the timing is, and then creates a score from that. So that's basically how it works.
Yeah, we have some topics we want to go through with Alistair for today's interview. We will talk about technology maybe later, but just quickly, something we need to mention is that when we talk about games you made in 2005, people have to remember that Arduino launched in 2005, but it didn't reach immediately the whole world. So when games like this are made, like it's not like for me, I started making games and Arduino was already around and I had plenty of technologies I could explore. You had to do so many hijacking of existing technologies, etc., to achieve what you were trying to do at any time of your career. And in many games in your portfolio, it's super impressive when you start to focus on this and realize that, oh, but there is no Arduino here, or it was really early stage of Arduino, etc. And I have to admit, like, I mean, I admire you for that. I know it's like the technological part, and like as an artist, I'm more focused on your research, etc. But technologically speaking, you have some pretty impressive shit in your portfolio. I have to admit, like, I'm super impressed. But
you.
that was that's not a question, just a comment from my side. Sorry for the digression. Meanwhile, in between 2005 and 2010, you did what for me is one of the most famous game you made, which is Hit Me. It's tell us about Hit Me. How do you play?
Sure. So I guess it was in 2005, but Hit Me was a game that I wanted to make because in 2005, I wanted to show that these physical games could be just as intense as like, first person shooters and stuff like that you might play, on looking at a screen and whatnot. And so I made Hit Me, and really got a lot of influence from other sort of games, like even just like childhood games that I would play with my cousin and my sister, which is like, one of them was called janken piko piko, which is janken is, rock, paper, scissors in Japanese. And piko piko is one of those hammers that go piko piko when you hit it. I don't know if you've seen the hammer, the plastic hammer. It's like a little toy, and it makes this like sound when you hit somebody or something with it. But there's a version of rock, paper, scissors in Japan that I used to play where it was like you take a top of a lid off of a pot, and you have the piko piko hammer, and you put it on the table like between you and your opponent, and you do rock, paper, scissors, and whoever wins can grab the hammer and try to bash the other person on the head with it. I mean, obviously it's a toy hammer, so it does not hurt, and it just makes a funny sound. But the loser can grab the pot lid and basically shield themselves with it. And it becomes a really intense, it's really funny at the same time. And it was just like such a very exciting for, kids to play. And we had so much fun with it. So I wanted to create some kind of level of tension to that extent. I also wanted to create a game that's like really made it fun to watch. So like a spectator game. And so I was thinking of things like, sumo and where you have this, tight ring that you have to play inside. And then people are watching from the outside. Or like I also referenced this Jean-Claude Van Damme film where he's like, I think it's called Lionheart, but there's a fight scene, like a street fighting scene, where all these people, these rich people, are like betting on these like street fighters, and he ends up like it's in this abandoned parking lot, and they like park their cars with the headlights like into the circle, and they're all standing around like waving wads of cash. It's cheesy.
Oh yeah,
it's a cheesy but fun movie. And he does this like fist to fist kind of like combat, and it's like and just that like scene is so interesting because it's like the people create that circle, and people are watching these people play this game. Yeah. So that was like another influence. And so there are a couple of things that I wanted to achieve with that game. And then also I it was a wearable tech kind of game, so I made these soft hats, hoods, and then I put these plastic boxes on top. Each box has an arcade push button on top with the wireless like pinhole camera, those really cheap cameras back then. And then I also used, because wireless components, like electronic components, were really expensive at the time, I used this GE wireless doorbell system that had a doorbell for the front door and the back door. So it would play like two different tunes for depending on which doorbell was pressed, which means that it's receiving two different signals for the two buttons. So like then I could just embed that button itself into like doorbell into each person's hat, and then it definitely already has an ID to recognize which button is being pressed. And so like that was the mod and or the hack, I guess, of like the doorbell system, and like basically using its wireless capabilities and communication for that. And then, so when you hit your opponent on the head, your camera takes a snapshot. And if your opponent is in the snapshot, and so the snapshot goes on to the projected, image on the wall, so everybody can see it. The spectators look at it, and they can keep track of the score with the projection on the wall. And basically, then a judge. And oftentimes I was the judge, but it can be somebody else as well. They would to assess whether or not the opponent was in the photograph, and if they're in the photograph, then you get like bonus points for if you see their face and stuff in the photograph. And then like the projected image on the wall, there will be an archive of like all the photos that were taken during the game. And then, you know, you have a final score at the end. And the game itself is like really, it's only like 30 seconds long, but it actually feels super long when you're playing it, because like anything can happen in those 30 seconds and stuff. But that was the whole game, I guess. Yeah.
Lionheart as an inspiration for Hit Me was a surprise to me. I have to be, I didn't know about this. It actually makes sense, and the performative aspect of it is actually something we find in many of your games, many of the experiences you design and develop. We have this again in a game you made some years later, which is Hotaru. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right.
Yeah.
But okay, cool. Close enough.
That's perfect.
Okay, cool. But we have again this idea of performance in it. Like there is the wearable aspect to it. There is the social aspect to it. But there is also the performative, what Alistair called earlier, maybe the theatrics of it, which are three themes that we find in a lot of your games. I'd say if I have to describe your games, and only can use three keywords, these are the three keywords I'd use. Maybe you can talk a bit about Hotaru so people can understand what's happening in the videos they are watching right now.
Yeah, sure. So it's a game that is about wearing costumes and sort of becoming the role of a character in a story. And the story is about like these two last lightning bugs, hotaru in Japanese, that are existing in the world, and they're fighting this like invisible enemy, and they have to do this kind of task in order to like fight the enemy. And so the task is one player has a tank, a physical tank on their back, and then they have a glove, and they have to make a certain gesture to like fill the tank up with lightning. So there's like kind of like this power that the player is creating, this lightning bug is creating. And so as their tank fills up with light, once it's full, they can hold hands with the other lightning bug. And while they're holding hands, the lightning gets transferred to the other lightning bug. And the other lightning bug has a gauntlet on with like these what is it, spikes that light up. And so their gauntlet fills up with light. And once it's full of light, that player can shoot the invisible enemy by holding their arm up and sort of aiming into the air. But the thing is that they're not really aiming at anything specific. It's a game about poses and gestures rather than the actual shooting of the enemy. And so the poses and gestures are the things that are the most important. And so the two players then repeat this process, and they try to like battle their way through to survive. And sometimes the enemy then attacks them, and they have to get into a pose where the one with the gauntlet sort of shields both players. And you can see everything flashes red, and there's like an alarm and everything. And so they have to get into this stance in order to defend themselves. And then so this happens like over and over again, but that's basically the game.
I mean, I understand that, it went through kind of multiple iterations to get to that point. That, at one point you had a kind of projection dome, and at one point I believe you were kind of tracking like lasers or something in 3D space. And obviously, you kind of pared that down to, I guess what was most important, which was the poses and the relationship between the two players. I mean, could you talk us through what was that process of elimination like? Like, did it kind of, because it looked like you're making some really interesting technology for this, so it must have been kind of quite difficult to sort of let that go. Is that the case?
It wasn't hard to let it go. I think what happened is that at the time I just didn't know what my limit was in terms of like how big of a thing that I can make. And then it just kept on getting bigger and bigger. And that projection dome actually took a lot of time to make, because it was really, really big. And I used what was it? It was like reflective projection material, and then it used like replacement camping tent poles that are like made from fiberglass that you would like bend and put in a camping tent, and they just happen to be really affordable. So the whole thing is like the structure is made from those tent poles, embedded into the projection fabric, and it was kind of difficult and getting that to work with what is it, computer vision, and on a spherical surface, so like using a spherical mirror and such. It was just like, it was a lot. It was a little too much.
It sounds phenomenal. It sounds complex, I mean, like,
yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's just a lot of moving parts in a situation like that.
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't know my limit, but then that project is when I reached that limit. And so I wanted, and people would always walk by and be like, oh, what's that? They would ask about the screen versus the actual costumes. And I was like, why are they asking about the screen so much? Like, I know it's like a spectacle, but like, and then so I was like, oh, it is about the costumes and the roles that people are playing. So I probably need to pare it down a lot more. And then at the end, it became more about the pose. But it was funny. It had a lot of growing pains. Like, I remember I took it to a film festival, and people were like, I think you should have like a script. This is like after I dropped the big screen, and people were like, I think you should have a screen in here. Like, how do I know that, like, I'm battling the enemy? Like, where are the enemies? But I think that there's also like a lot of, I wanted to see how far like people's imagination could guide them in that sense. And if you tell people that there's this enemy, but you can't really see them, or you can't pinpoint them, but it's, you're trying to really achieve this kind of these tasks in order to fight, for yourselves. Like, in a way, I wanted to also see what that would be like in the age of like VR and things like that. Like, I just wanted to see like how far the imagination could really take us. And so I just thought that it might be a better idea to pare it down. And also, like, there's a lot of things with like festivals, or when you're trying to show your games, there's like always the risk of things falling apart. And so like, especially with hardware, it it's like a crushing feeling when you're at a public event and your thing doesn't work, and it can be really awful. But it happens because our things are not meant to withstand like thousands and thousands of uses and stuff. But and so after that, I spent a lot of time like building things that were like more more durable, and like just trying to avoid like these moments that are, you know, soul crushing moments where things fall apart. So
what's fascinating for me here is that in your work, there is a lot of research on social interactions. And in Hotaru, you decided the choice you made about removing the screen, any form of display, is really important for me. Not so for the performative aspect. Obviously, we are showing our games in festivals, so we need to have some spectacle coming from the play. Otherwise, if it's a game for 1 or 2 players, there is a problem also of audience flux. Like, we need people to play the game and others to watch them, etc. And when everything is mediated by the screen, there is a level of social connection you don't have. But there are some ways screens can be used to make this mediation relevant. And this is what you did for me in Ninja Shadow Warrior, where it's something that is both, well, it's more durable because the technology is less, it's not wearable, etc. So you don't have this problem of soft materials tearing the electronics, etc. And the screen is actually a tool for the social mediation. So that's a clever way to take on this problem, I'd say. How did you come with the idea for a Ninja Shadow Warrior? Was it rooted in this kind of in these thoughts?
Yeah. I wanted to make a what is it, like a video game cabinet type experience, and I wanted to get people to make sort of use their bodies to play these games, like, you know, very much like Twister, where people use their bodies to play the game. And I wanted like a really sort of spontaneous kind of situation where people could jump into the game and sort of play it together. But the screen, I think, is really important there, because it's just, you know, it's just a playing around with a camera and a Kinect camera, really, and sort of using that as the method of playing the game. It's funny because before I was trying to make a green screen with it and stuff, and it was really hard to get the camera to be consistent every time the game was played. And so the Kinect had come out that year, and so I was able to use that. But yeah.
I mean, there's something that, I mean, the thing that really jumps out to me about it is the kind of the openness and the flexibility of it, in that, you know, this is a game that, you know, it doesn't know, and it doesn't care whether you're playing on your own, whether you're playing with friends. And so, you know, when you do invite your friends to join in and play with you, you get to enjoy the mischief of that. You feel like you're kind of breaking the rules in some level. And I think that's really nice. Was that part of the kind of intention behind the kind of social interactions in it?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted people to, I guess what I was imagining is that people would play it and they'd realize that they could probably do better if other people were in it, and how people could then jump in. One of my favorite moments showing that game was at a museum, the Museum of Moving Image, and there was a family there, and it was like 3 generations. I think it was like grandpa, the dad, and a bunch of kids, and they tried all these different ways of playing the game, and one of them was in this line. They started in this line with the tallest person in the back, and then all the way down to the littlest kid. And then as soon as the image came on the screen, they would just like break and then try to get into formation to play the game. It was really funny. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. Or like, I think there was that photo that you had of you playing, and you had your jacket up like this.
That's right.
But
I can bring that up just now. That was I was at the Museum of the Moving Image. This was Indiecade East 2016, and it was the Little Happy's version of it. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. I'll see if I can find the tweet of it and put it up on the screen. Let's see.
It was the evolution, right? It was Little Happy's, the evolution of Ninja Shadow Warrior.
Yeah. So it's that I worked on with Tony Pizza. But we made the kind of like, another version of it, but it's essentially the same hardware and everything.
And you had the Twitter bot. I assume you were talking about this.
Yes. I guess because the reason that the audience can see these photos of me posing for the game right now is because it automatically posts the photos that get taken to Twitter. And I think that's really interesting. But like, what's your relationship to the kind of social media like?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's like street cred, but like digital, right? It's just like, check out my high score, but like, on the digital realm. So like the earlier version of Ninja Shadow Warrior actually would post the photos onto Tumblr. And then I also made a game with Ramsey Nasser that's called Selfie Deathmatch.
Yeah.
And the photos there would end up on Twitter also. And that was fun. And I think that one you could actually vote and see like how many likes you had, or maybe we didn't implement that part, but it was definitely something we were thinking about, like, oh, people should get bonus points if like people like those photos or something. But yeah, it's just fun to like, and it's also fun like taking sort of blurring that line between physical and digital, right? So like things that exist in our digital world, having it exist, things that exist in our physical world and having it easily exist in our digital world as well. And playing in that space there, I think is fun.
Well, I think there's a weird kind of middle space, isn't there, with with social media, where you look at what we do as alternative controller developers, and we're very much kind of embedded in the real world, kind of face-to-face interactions. And often we look at digital games and we go, it's all imaginary. It all takes place in an imaginary world. And in a way, like social media, it's real life face-to-face stuff, or at least it's faces, but not necessarily to other faces. It's the faces, it's our real lives, but put into a world that is on some level imaginary on account of the technology. Would you agree?
Definitely. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that definitely, like, there's different places where the stories can be told, and it's not just our physical world. It's like they can definitely seep into our digital world as well. Yeah.
Just for the viewers, Selfie Stick Deathmatch is a competitive game for 2 players with a selfie stick. Each player has a selfie stick, and there is a photo taken on a timer, and you score by the number of faces present in it, and then the photos are tweeted, and you can actually see these pictures. Alistair was just showing on at Selfie DM, I guess. And yeah, the number of likes and retweets adds to the base score. So it's really like a mix between physical and digital space here, where you have your usual alt-control social interaction, people being physical, but then there is this level of social interaction on social media that is almost a political commentary here. I mean, maybe it's just me, but this is what I get from it. Was this an intention of yours?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Ramsey and I think we you know, like Twitter can be really a play space and sort of an interesting space for that kind of interaction. And so, yeah, I think that's the reason why we incorporated that. Yeah. What do you mean by like political?
Like, is there a layer of message about our relationship to social media somehow?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean,
I assume so. Like,
yeah.
It's not an innocent question. Like, I assume there is one, especially because of the work you do with Ramsey. So you are talking about Ramsey Nassar. You worked a lot with him. Is from NYU Poly too, if I'm correct.
He taught there at one point, yeah.
Okay. And yeah, you worked on many games. We won't be able to talk about everything you've done. You have a way too big portfolio for that, but for people if you want to go on Kaho's website and look at Windows Vistas, Safe as X, Shuffle, Robots in the Sky, Midgenomen, Micro, and I guess that's how we pronounce
Micro
this.
UN.
Micro UN, okay. Wizard's Hand, all these war games you made together with Ramsey.
Yeah.
Did you met at the NYU Poly or somewhere else?
Oh,
how did you start working together?
It's funny. We actually went to the same grad program, but we were several years apart, so I didn't know him then. But we actually met at iBeam, which is a technology and art nonprofit in New York. Also, something that has made a huge life like a significant point in my life. And we were both fellows there. Also, slightly different times. But definitely that's when we first met. And we actually, I think our first project together was with other people as well. We all organized a game jam called Jean-Claude Van Jam.
Again.
There's a weird pattern that's emerging. Maybe a little bit embarrassing, but but basically it was a game jam where we would put a Jean-Claude Van Damme film on a USB stick, and then we put all the USB sticks in a fish bowl, and then we had like each team come up and choose a Jean-Claude Van Damme film, and they would have to make a game from it. Because I mean it was such an influence on my on hit me and stuff, and so I guess we were just talking about it and people thought it was funny, so that we should do this game jam. But it was actually amazing. It was so fun. And that's probably the first real collaboration I had with him. There are a bunch of other people also involved in that project who I loved working with as well. Yeah, and then from there we just realized we had a lot of things in common. He had a funny game. I think it's called what was it called? It's some kind of joystick game. That's all I'm gonna say, because probably you want to look it up and check it out. But it's like a joystick game that he worked on with his collaborator Kurt. But you like strap the joystick onto your pelvic areas,
Mm.
But anyway,
Sword fight.
yeah, sword
Apparently.
fight.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had a lot of
Oh,
things in common.
and you're handcuffed
Yeah.
in this game too.
And so yeah, so we realized we had a lot of things in common, and then we started collaborating from there. And eventually, like, we also did some educational content that's based on our practice. So we worked on like an after school program that was related to costumes as game controllers, and we did some other sort of education related stuff, mostly informal education. But that was really fun too.
Well, we can talk about teaching a bit, I guess, because one of the game you made together was Shake It Up in 2013. You actually showed Shake It Up in 2020 at the May Control event in Japan, which is kind of the equivalent of altctrl GDC in Japan, maybe a bit smaller, but the idea is the same. And this game, so maybe we can tell people how this game is played, but also this game is used in teaching somehow.
Yeah.
So this is something interesting. Maybe you can tell us a bit about this.
Yeah, this game is basically uses the soda can as a capacitive switch or a touch sensor, and so somebody has to come and for a person shakes the can. So this is like based on, so when you're a kid, maybe you were handing somebody a soda can and you would shake it up beforehand, and then when they opened the soda, like the soda would get all over your friend, and it was like, oh, funny. But the game is based on that. So you're supposed to shake the can and then set it down. And once you set it down, you have to wait a certain amount of time before you open it, which basically means opening is like basically touching it again. And if you do it too fast, the whole thing explodes. I mean, it's just shown on a screen that it explodes, like the can itself does not explode. And if you don't, if you wait long enough, then the can will not explode, and then so you win the game in a way. And so we use that as like a tool for teaching game design, because there's so many mods, like there's so many rules that you can modify and like create different kind of scenarios from, like who is the person who shakes the can, who is allowed to then grab the can afterwards, and so just like trying out different ideas, and we get the students to like come up with different ideas for rules and like just discuss how that might change the game, that kind of thing. And then also at the same time we can talk about the technology, which is like a capacitive sensor that we're working with, things like that, like even the crossover between like what is physical, and what is digital, like the screen. I think our version has the screen, there's a virtual can on the screen and that's what explodes. Like, is that even a good interpretation of what's happening? Like, to have another can of soda on a screen even though the can is right there in front of you, that kind of thing. So like we talk about all those kind of things, just really just a starting point for discussion, really.
I mean, do you have a kind of a philosophy of like what makes good teaching tools, good teaching materials for teaching, alternative controllers or wearable controllers and things like that?
Definitely. I think that there's an aspect of knowing the techniques around building things, and just like the fabrication of these things. There's just also a general like understanding of the technology involved in the circuits that you're making, and then really an understanding of like the game design for it, and sort of maximizing that kind of experience, that so it's like fun, and it's not like obnoxious, or there's a lot of things that you try to avoid with like physical games. You don't want people to feel bad, or you don't want them to feel humiliated, and or embarrass people, things like that. And then like the kind of stories that you want to tell through everything, especially with costumes, that's a great opportunity for you to create these stories and scenarios that really help set up the game. And so like things like that, there's definitely an approach to a lot of things. And ultimately, like if you're showing it in a public space, like knowing that the spectators will become the next players, things like that. Like how do you show a game in a public space so that people understand it immediately, and then want to play it. And so like really talking about stuff, and it's interesting because if the people have only played mostly digital games, I think that or video games, like if you look at a video game controller, there's like a limited number of buttons and ways to interact with the game itself. But like just even creating explaining that physical games can be played an infinite number of ways, right? Like when you tag somebody in tag, like there's so many different ways that you can do a slide and then tag somebody, or you can jump up and tag, there's like infinite numbers of ways of doing things. And so like even just understanding that, I think is always is really exciting, because like suddenly there's just so much that you can do with games in general, as a designer, right, with physical games.
Oh, totally. I mean, totally agree with you. I mean, I guess like, from a student's perspective, I mean, is it a lot of kind of learning by doing? I mean, is that what, having example projects like Shake It Up does, is give them a space to learn this stuff by doing it hands-on?
Definitely. There's like a lot of playing people's games and playing games in general. I think that, one of the things, like costumes as game controllers, one of the first classes that I have is I have people play the game Ninja, which is like, what is it? A playground game or a street game. You can call it, and, play it once to learn the rules, and then play it again with ninja masks on, and then see how different it is when you have your mask on. And people will do really risky things like when they have their mask on, because suddenly they're either playing a role or there's like anonymity involved in it, and suddenly they'll jump higher, or like they'll look a lot more like they are really chopping somebody, like action poses and things like that. And it's like really exciting to see, but it's important, like how can I ever explain that to people unless they play it like that? And that's the first class I usually teach, because for that course, because I just want people to sort of recognize that costumes can have a really interesting role in influencing the player to play in a different way, and intensify the experience.
In many social experiences, costume is one of the most important elements to make the threshold between the boring normal reality and the social rules of the game. I'm thinking about judo because it's a topic that is I'm doing judo, and the moment you wear your gi, the moment you tie your belt, suddenly you are able to do stuff you are not supposed to do in other contexts. Like, obviously, I won't go in the street and start throwing people away and make armbands or whatever. But once you're on the mat and you wear your costume, you have new rules applying to you. And in role playing, it's not well, it's, I guess, a really important aspect of it, the costume, but also props in general, or the elements that say, okay, now new rules apply. And this is something we have in other games of yours, including like the Cupcake Machine or Micro UN. Maybe you can develop on this.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, it was a bit of a brutal question like this, but about role playing and costume and the role of costumes in role playing, and social rules in general, how they influence social rules.
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely like the magic circle concept, right? That that these games create some kind of circle in which you do things that you would not normally do, or act in a certain way that you would not normally act in. But definitely costumes like enhance the story that's being told. And I think they make it a lot more interesting. I think that yeah, there's like a role that you're playing, and definitely costumes help in that kind of way. The Micro UN, which I did with Ida Benedetto, Christian Howard, and Ramsey, was really interesting. That it was such an experimental thing for us, but we had people come in and sort of choose costumes for like these royal portraits for and creating we would have them then choose their island from a list of like uninhabited islands around New York City. And then we had after that, it was like after they created these portraits, they would then role play through email, and they would try to sort of take over each other's islands and stuff. And it was actually really interesting. It was actually hard to keep it going on email, but it was cool to see if people sort of, you know, how strongly they role played the, you know, their storyline and their character. But yeah, with things like that, I think that it's always interesting to see how role playing and costumes can work together.
I guess costuming in this context is a visual embodiment of the change of status of an element. Like the element has a value in the reality, physical space, like in the boring life. It has another status in the magic circle, and costume is a way to visually embody the change of status of a player. And I guess this is obviously liberating. This is the first value of this, but also it helps other people to engage in this. So I think I don't know for Micro UN, but yeah, I think this is why props in general and set design in general in ALT+CTRL should be explored even more, because we need this more in this kind of games than in traditional video game. I mean, obviously. And you talked about Ida Benedetto, and you worked with her on the Cupcake Machine too, which is also very theatrical, very performative. But so maybe we can transition to that.
Sure. That was a game I worked on with Craig Trefry, Nick Fortuno, Ida Benedetto. And I think it was a escape the room before we knew what to call it, an escape the room. But it was part of this like this night market in New York that would happen like spontaneously, and the constraints were that each art group would have a box truck without any signs on it, so like a plain box truck, and then they could do whatever they want within that box truck space. So I've heard stories of like people having hot tubs in there, people having like dumpling restaurants, something, and then like, and it was like this spontaneous festival that would happen like once a year. Lost Horizons night market, I think is what it was called. And so one year we decided to do it, and our box truck had a wooden wall we made, and then there was a series of buttons and lights on the wall, and then like a opening at the bottom, and the story was that this man had created the cupcake machine, and I think so Nick dressed up as like the person, the barker. He would invite people into the cupcake machine and like introduce the machine, and then something would go wrong, and then he would leave the machine and sort of have the guests kind of figure out what the problem was, and then there was like some kind of puzzle on the wall with buttons and things where people had to figure out the puzzle, and then once they were able to figure out the puzzle, they got rewarded with an actual cupcake that would come out of the bottom space. But it was pretty funny. We had like a fog machine, and it was just like a lot of chaos. And I think there were a lot of drunk people that night also, including myself maybe. And so it was pretty chaotic, but really fun.
Again, by drunk people for drunk people. I like this.
I mean, do you have a... Oh, no, Tatiana, go ahead.
Okay. I was about to say, it's interesting from a theatrical point of view that you worked on costume, and it makes sense coming from fashion design. And in many of your work, there is more and more set design happening. So we have, of course, the cupcake machine, which was made on a short period of time, but also things like mitgenommen. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this closely enough from what's supposed to be said, mitgenommen. And from a theatrical perspective, it makes complete sense. So is it how you came to this kind of set design or stage design exploration? Was theatric the thing that drove you, or not at all?
I think in many ways there's like this whole aspect of media art that's about installations, and I think that is probably originally where the influences for a lot of these things, because I call a lot of my games like installations, right? When I explain it in the media art world, I can't really, like, I don't think that makes a lot of sense in game design, or the games world, but like saying that it's an installation of, is, I think, makes sense in the media arts context. And a lot of it comes from there. Definitely like the presence of story and how to take that in different ways, and express the story in different ways, I think is important, and is always been something that's interesting to me. And so therefore it does start like including the space that everything is in. There's definitely then also what you're referring to is sort of the theatrics of a performance that the players are performing in a lot of ways, playing roles and such. And so in that sense, like, I think in those times, like it almost becomes like the stage or a set. And so definitely it's definitely those different concepts are interwoven into a lot of the games.
So Mitgenommen, for the viewers, is a game made in 72 hours during the Urban Action Jam, made also with a lot of people we already talked about before. You are kind of feels like a bit of a collective or something here. At least you're working a lot together. It looks like it.
Well, actually, so this group of people, I absolutely loved working with them, but we all, the 72 hours experience was also like such a significant experience. And if anybody sees any other events like that popping up, I highly recommend to look into it, because basically you apply to it and they group you in a team, and the team was about like 10 to 12 people, and they're with all different kind of backgrounds. So we had engineers, we had architects, we had like sculptors, we had who else? So theater related people, carpenters, game designer. Like it was just like so many different kinds of people on our team, and we had to come up with like each team was given a public park in this town of Witten in Germany, and we made installations in each park, considering what kind of park it is, where it's located, like who are the people who come to the park, things like that. And it was a really intense experience, because I mean, it's basically a 72-hour game jam, and we were like sleeping in the same room. It's like in this elementary school that was like off season, so we were sleeping in there, and spending a lot of time together. And we ended up making this installation in this one part of this park, where we took we had these wooden boxes, and we embedded them with like hacked electronics, and they would do funny stuff like make sounds and like light up, or like I think we had walkie-talkies in some of them, so you could like communicate through the box to another person, the box. And we had these like, I don't know, it was just like creating some kind of explorative space for people to sort of come and check out, like, what are these boxes, and then like start playing with them. And so that's what we did. There's some amazing other amazing installations during that event also, that if you can find the information to look at, I think they're really cool. And it was just like, I don't think I'd worked with that many people on a game before. So it was really exciting. And, from all parts of the world also. And so, yeah, really fun. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
I mean, the thing that kind of stood out to me when I was reading about Mitgenommen was like, just imagining the kind of magic moment of someone stumbling upon one of these boxes, no idea what this is. They find a button or, whatever sensor it is, and they interact with it, and it does stuff. And it's like, that is a magic moment that you've created for a total stranger who you will never meet, and you will never see them have that interaction. And that moment belongs to them. And there's something lovely and kind of generous about it.
Yeah, it was. What was funny though is like a couple of days later we went back to the park, and some of the boxes had been trashed, and there was one box that had been lit on fire and everything. But it was but it was so funny because I mean, I think we expected that kind of stuff to happen, because we're, like you said, we were giving them these boxes to do whatever they wanted with. So yeah, that was definitely an interesting part of the experience, and just like letting it go into the world in a way.
Yeah.
Well, the setup on fire, like this was unexpected. I mean, But yeah, they do them like whatever makes them be playful and have fun. I don't
But there is, I mean, isn't there this thing in, you know, in the work that we do as alternative controller creators that, you know, that we are making this stuff for a certain level of resilience. You know, you want it to survive till the end of the exhibition or whatever. But you cannot fully predict what people will do. I mean, when we had Remy Soyer on last week, he was talking about, you know, he built these like foot pedal controllers to be super resilient for a public place. And within 3 hours, you know, kids had trashed them just by interacting with them, just by jumping on them, you know, just by doing what came naturally to them. And I guess there's something kind of fun in the story that you just told, because it's like, you know, it just encapsulates the idea you cannot anticipate everything, you know? People will interact with things in ways you don't expect, and, you know, I guess, would you say that what we need to do as creators is just accept that?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I think we can do as much as we can to try to make it more stable. And I think over time, I definitely learned like certain tricks into making things, you know, as stable as possible. Just like giving less opportunities for things to break, if that makes sense. So like, you know, even down to like the way something is wired, or something, or the way something is like attached to the floor, or, you know, like things like that, like those things can make a huge difference. And so really finding the right kind of hardware for that, or just right kind of tools for it, I think is pretty important. But at a certain point, we have to sort of accept that might happen. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, I think that there's certainly this world that we've created with, you know, DIY sort of level of techniques that we use in order to make these things. This is like super important that we have a space like that in order to really experiment. I don't think, like, because these large game corporations and like companies, they're not going to put a lot of money into creating a controller, a brand new controller for every new game, right? Like it's very costly to them. And, you know, and while, you know, maybe in the 80s or the 90s, there were more you know, examples of that, right? Like it's just, but it's become less and less of that kind of thing. So like, it's really important that we create a space for us to be able to make these things. Like, even when I teach the classes, you know, for youth, or, you know, people in school, I can't be honest and tell them, like, I can't tell them that this is going to generate a lot of income for you, like knowing how to make alternative controllers, but like knowing how people interact with technology and knowing how people can use technology in to create these playful, you know, experiences is like really important, right? And like keeping that open and understanding it on that level, I think is something that can then, you know, create opportunities for people in the future. But I think that this freedom of us being able to create these things is like super important, and these communities that we have, to show them and to celebrate these kind of games, super important. Like it's just it can't really exist anywhere else, right?
Yeah, and instigating playfulness when it comes to making really stable technologies, etc. When you do playful set design, like in Mitgenommen, you have at some point to leave some leeway to people. Playfulness cannot be too constrained. Otherwise, well, it's not playfulness anymore. It's another mindset. To put it in other words for me, if you go full Roger Caillois on this, it needs to be a bit Padia. It cannot be full Ludus. At some point, people need some leeway to experiment if we want to instigate playfulness. And like, it's one of the things that add a lot of value to our work. I mean, I feel like it. And I don't know what you think about this, but I mean, when it comes to playful set design, it piggybacks actually quite well to with what you are going to show us, maybe live, but maybe we can have a quick glance at it right now. You know, the miniature game, because it's kind of set design too. So maybe we can just have a glance at it, and then we can show that live in the future or present.
None of the lights are on, but it's a diorama game. But I actually made it because I have been trying to get grants to make these kind of large installations, and like really thinking about the space as an interface, right? So thinking of the whole space as a game controller itself. And I was having trouble getting funding and finding funding and such. And so I thought that if I just made a miniature version of it, it would just cost less to make. But I like miniatures anyway, so it was fun to make. But I can also talk about it more when I have the lights on and everything.
Yes. Exactly. Let's see that in the future for us, but in the present for the viewers. This is confusing.
But I guess it does bring us on to the next segment, because obviously, you know, this bit was pre-recorded, but I guess now would be a good time perhaps to switch back to the present day, back to Wednesday, and we will see you now on the live segment of the show. So thank you very much for doing this with us, and well, I guess we shall switch over to seeing you live.
Okay, sounds good.
Fantastic. Well, see you in the present. And here we are. We are live, as if by magic. I'm hoping that was a really good smooth segue that I did, but I don't know. Anyway, time travel. Excellent. We have successfully traveled through time, and we have with us present day Kaho, who thank you very much for coming along and joining us.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm a little bit sleepy, but I'm here.
Yeah. Well, we do appreciate you coming so early. For the audience, it's what 6:30 in Japan right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, no, we do really appreciate it, and we understand that you have brought with you the miniature that you were showing us. So yeah, could you show it to us? I guess
sure. This is a work in progress, something that I was working on before the COVID pandemic, and sort of actually stopped working on for a little while. But it's a little diorama that I made inside of a little greenhouse here. And it's a mouse's living room. And there's a mouse TV in the middle. I guess it's hard to see the video maybe, but it's showing a video of a macaroni and cheese recipe. But these are, the paws are actual controllers that work. And so they have like silicone pads on top of push buttons, components, and then and so it's can play two people games. So you can pretend like you're visiting your mouse friend in their living room, and play some mouse games. But I've been really into miniatures, and sort of the different things that you can make with them. It's also something I wanted to make because I want to experiment more with physical rooms and spaces and interfaces, and then thinking of the room itself as the controller, right? and sort of embedding more things into a room. And I've been wanting to do that for a while, but it's really hard to get funding for some of these things. And the low cost solution to that would be making a really small scale version of what I would have wanted to make. And so that's just one of the ways that I've found I can move forward with these ideas. So miniatures has been one of those. You know, I love sort of making these kind of concepts that I try to stay true to the theme, no matter how silly it is in my head, and just taking this idea of like what would be what are the kind of video games that a mouse might play, and sort of hopefully finish programming those, and so people can come and play these mouse games.
And do you have an idea of like what video games would a mouse play? I mean, would they be like the games that you and I play, but you know, with cheese and things, or would a mouse, you know, would they explore the world totally differently?
I think the enemies are the kind of enemies are pretty clear from a mouse's point of view, and the kind of and the whatever the goals that they try to achieve, you know, in terms of like finding food and such, is pretty clear. So really along those lines, I think I would make a game. I have to show you the back of the box. Is of course a mess of wires, but there's actually a Raspberry Pi on there, and the cables that then connect to the little monitor there. But Raspberry Pi is so exciting to me as hardware, because you can do so much, especially with the small Raspberry Pis. You can the what is it called, the W0?
Oh, I think I know the ones. Yeah, because they are the size of a credit card or something, aren't they? Like they're kind of flat.
Exactly. I think they're actually smaller than that.
Oh wow.
But they can. But you can run the actual. I mean, it's a very small Linux computer with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And has video as well. You can attach video monitors to it, and there's so many things that you can do. So instead of like technically like for the Hotaru game, I had you know, two androids that eventually changed to like these two OSC XOSC chips or microcontroller boards. And those were networked with my laptop, and the laptop was running the main part of the game. Like now with if you can use the Raspberry Pi and like have the actual controller itself be sort of the center of the game, running the game, and so you don't really need like your laptop involved in that whole setup. I think it's such a really interesting, powerful tool that I want to understand more. These kind of like technical things, I'm not like I wouldn't say I'm like a programmer ever. I would never say that, right? But you know, it's really important that I like try to learn these things and like try to learn the different ways to code these kind of things to take advantage of the hardware. And so that's kind of where I am with the Raspberry Pi, and just like making projects that use this kind of hardware is always like the most helpful thing, I think, for me to learn like how to best use them. So that's another reason why I'm using the Raspberry Pi there. And slowly learning.
Do you see yourself doing, you know, more different kinds of miniatures? You know, I mean, I guess because you were talking about using this as a way to prototype stuff for big spaces, but I mean, has doing this made you go, well, hang on, there's a whole world of fun to be had by making deliberately tiny games?
Yeah, I think like scale in itself is always like this playful way of kind of modifying things and and what is it? Recently I got like I purchased a like one of those tactile keyboard buttons
All right.
that they're like huge. They're like large size ones. And it's really fun because like I can make whatever key like custom keycaps or something I was thinking of making. But uh, but like just scale is always like a funny thing to me. And so yeah, I think and then miniatures, I think being in Japan, there's a lot of appreciation of miniatures here. I think that it's just not as spacious as the US.
Right.
And so there's a lot of small things you can go and look at models, kits, and stuff like that. And there's just a lot of great examples of miniatures here. And, there's a lot of tools. It's just pretty amazing. Just browsing like art stores and craft stores and stuff. In terms of like the things that I can find. This also helps me like figure out. I 3D printed the case for the monitor and the hands at this co-working space in Osaka called Kobox that had 3D printers and like an amazing community of people there. And unfortunately, that was before the COVID pandemic. So I would go there quite often, and then I was able to print these parts out there, and so like learning about the community that way too. So it's not like, yeah, there's just a lot to sort of you know definitely miniatures are things that I can make more of. It's really fun, and it doesn't cost as much, and it doesn't take up so much space. So yeah.
It actually piggybacks quite smoothly to one of the questions we had during from the chat during the interview. I don't think we'll have time for the game, but fortunately we have enough time for the Q&A. And this question was from Bubble Reg. And it was, in the wake of 2020, have you been thinking about wearable games that can be played by multiple people at social distance or remotely?
Um, that's a good question. To be completely honest, it was really hard to make things and really think about physical games. We don't really think of these games as things that might risk people's lives, right? And so much fear and things that we don't actually know. I think that was like a lot of the scariness has been. A lot of the scariness is that we don't know. It's invisible. It's like like it's so natural to talk to your friends and see your friends and like and interact with them face to face, and yet there was COVID. So I don't know, it was really hard for me to even think in that sense. I had to really get over, or not really get over, but really accept the fact that things were different. And that was really hard, like way harder than I thought it would be, to accept. And so I did try to make an online game at one point, for video chat, but it's just not the same. And it was pretty uninspiring year and a half, I guess. And really, I find it, maybe the last few weeks I've been feeling better about making things and like starting to talk about things and planning things out. But I found it surprising myself, just my reaction. But I think maybe other people also relate, in that sense, especially people who make these kind of games where we're in each other's physical presence, right?
Yeah, it was really hard for many of us.
Yes, I can certainly
Yeah,
sympathize.
not a you thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We had other questions not related to COVID. Cool. One of them was the following: when designing a game with wearables, do you start by thinking about what wearable you want and then build around that? Or do you think of a game concept first and figure out what wearables would support it?
Yeah, I am always um, I think it's really important to emphasize the game itself, what sort of experience you want people to have, and what kind of emotions you would imagine people feeling, things like that, over jumping to the technical solutions from the very beginning. I think that having a more human-centered experience is really important for physical games. I think there's some excitement around technology and the different hardware that you can use. I definitely personally feel excited about the technology always. But even though this is like the not very optimal and efficient with time, it's the technology I try to learn on my own when I can, so that I just have a pool of knowledge to be able to pull from, and then in that way I can really concentrate on what kind of experience the player is going through. I think that's the most important thing for me. It's just really hard to be like, oh, I'm going to use this cool accelerometer because I just think it's really cool. It's not going to be easily understood by people that that the accelerometer is really cool, right? And so it's like you really want to think about the game itself first, I think, before, and then technology becomes basically a support around that concept, and in the same way that if we want to put some theatrical elements in there, some performance, that becomes a supporting element as well, around the experience.
I can totally relate to that. So I like to make experimentations, like in the privacy, like private experimentation. So I have a pool of technologies I can use when I have to do something that will be public. So I really relate to that. And we'll have another question that is actually transitioning quite well with this one, which is, what are the most common problems or limitations you encountered when integrating clothing and tech in tech, I guess.
Oh, clothing. And clothing?
I guess the question would be when Bubble Reg, correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but I think it's when integrating tech in clothing. Did you encounter problems, limitations relating to that?
Yeah. So I think in general, I know I talked previously on the pre-recorded part about sort of the fashion statements, the social statements that your fashion might carry, and so of course any tech that might disrupt that or sort of give the wrong impression, I think that's one thing. But I love just seeing how the body moves in something. So like the movement of the body is really important, I think, as well, especially if you have the player moving in a certain way. And so thinking about that, it has to be comfortable. And I think unless discomfort is supposed to be part of the game concept, the actual device should be comfortable. And it definitely something that easily taken on and off, especially if you're in like a public space for a game and like people are lining up. It's like really difficult to dress people essentially, and that can take a lot of time, and that's always like really something that's on kind of lower on the priority list, but actually makes a huge difference when everything is live. And so just like the ease of that, I mean, there's really even more detailed things like who is it who dresses the player, right? Like in many ways you want the player to dress themselves, because having strangers touch people's bodies is not always okay. And so you have to kind of keep in mind the whole setup of what happens before the game actually starts, right? So there's that aspect. If the player is actually putting on the costumes or putting on the wearable stuff, is it easy to put on, right? Or do they have to have special information? And that's actually the reason why I made those vests for Mary Mac 5000, is because that's like the fastest way anybody can get the sensors on their body. And before that, they were like bandana straps that you tied around your arm and other parts of your body. That took forever. It was like the scenario at a live event, right? And so there's definitely things like that. When you're also making something that's wearable, like probably you may have seen this on certain like soft circuit type videos and things like that, but there's this element of always you're trying to incorporate something that's kind of stiff into something that's soft, like fabric that moves with people's bodies. And so when you're trying to put like hardware that's a little bit more stiffer than fabric itself, it'll actually break really easily. That difference in stiffness is what can cause that break, right? Because that means that there's more pressure on the harder stuff, which means that that's the hardware basically. And so you really have to figure out like the most durable way of making these things. And again, if it's in a live event and things break, it's like, devastating. And so those are definitely things to think about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I know I'm guilty of this. I don't necessarily embed. One of the first game I made, I had to know it's a wearable, and it's pretty much the only one I've made because it was like a pain in the ass to do, honestly. But I found myself explaining the game as I was dressing the players to make it go faster, actually, for them. Yeah. And try to be funny, come up with jokes, etc., to make it fast. And I had to make the cases in a hard material, so the cases would be broken before the electronic.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and you can tape also the boxes, etc. So I really interesting. We have two other questions. One is related to the stiffness of the material, so that's perfect. It's specifically about hit me. Were hard hats necessary because people were going too hard, or did they encourage people to play harder?
Interesting. That's a good question. So originally they were fabric hats. And they were like they were cut in the pattern of like a hood, and then with a strap underneath. And then there was actually a padded board, I think, in the head part, and then the box would screw onto the board, and then the fabric was like sandwiched in between. There was a lot more padding than the way I just described it, so it didn't really hurt people. When I remade the game, I used construction hats because I thought it would be number one, safer, and number two, they're actually extremely cheap and also durable. I think they were about $6, the ones that I got. And so, if you can imagine things always breaking, it's not bad to have just copies of the same controller with you. And so, for me, that was like a better kind of alternative. And then I mean, there's also like something playful about construction hats that are like, reminiscent of Legos and such. But yeah, like did people play harder when they had safety hats on? I'm not sure if they played that much differently. I can say one thing for sure is that people normally do not want to hurt their friends or whoever that they're playing with. And I've run this game so many times, and I've definitely had like hundreds of players now, maybe low hundreds, maybe like only above maybe 100, but barely. But I think that people don't want to hurt the other person, even if they're strangers. And so I think that no matter what, people are just going to say kind of play it the same way. And the earlier version of the game actually I had people sign injury waiver forms that I made with a lawyer friend of mine, Francis Shui, and he and these injury waiver forms were made because I was one thing was that I wanted people to be safer, yes, but also create this like feeling that you're about to do something really crazy and dangerous, right, and risky. And so like and so there's that also as well. But definitely, like, I think ultimately it's really the people don't want to hurt each other.
Yeah, definitely. One final quick question. I know we are running out of time, but I really want to ask this one. Okay, I wanted to ask about something we talked about a little after the interview, which is politics, basically. And in, for example, Merrimack 5000, how did you choose to put a very masculine imagery on what's usually a little girl's game? Because I think it's not innocent here. I mean, I'm sure it's not.
Yeah. So Merrimack 5000, it's definitely like it was always really funny to me, this whole idea of gender and kind of playing these kind of clapping games, and how as little girls playing clapping games, I don't remember a lot of boys playing them, although I've heard as an adult that there's certainly people who played it when they were younger. But just the idea of the imagery, as you mentioned, of these little girls clapping games, like actually knowing what kind of games they are and how they exist for more rocker types, even adults and stuff. It's always interesting for me, because essentially they're the same game about timing and accuracy, to all these rocker rhythm games, and so I don't think that I think always, like, as somebody who doesn't like understand the expectations of gender that much, like it's funny to me that these game systems would be sort of stuck in these like worlds of like this kind of gender imagery, and that they exist as systems throughout our world stuff. So things like that, like there's always those kind of aspects, I think, that I like to put into my games, or inevitably a part of my games, whether or not it's like that obvious or not. that's where it ultimately comes from. You know, like I was talking about Ninja Shadow Warrior, and you know, in a way, like that whole ninja theme was really funny to me because, you know, when I was growing up, there was a movie called American Ninja, and I think this is like before the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, and I just remember how funny I thought it was that, you know, you know, I have to show the preview. You have to look it up on YouTube or something to see the trailer. But it's like the first time in America, this dark arts of like the ninja, and really like exotifying that, and sort of that existence, that kind of you know, putting ninjas on so many things after that. I felt like that was the beginning of the trend, and how funny it is to see, you know, the culture that I'm familiar with represented in that way. And so that, you know, that Ninja Shadow Warrior is actually about that, that feeling as well. And so like these kind of themes are like always, I think, in my work, although it's not always, doesn't come to the surface necessarily. But yeah.
I think I found this trailer. I will put it in the chat for sure. I'm afraid we are reaching the end of the show. Kaho, Tula, is there anything you'd like to add before we head off? And also, where can people find you, find your works online, maybe?
Yeah, so I'm living in Japan currently, and I have been for the last few years, last 3 years, I guess now. And so you can find me here, and yeah, and my work you can find at kahoabe.net. You can also find me on Twitter. I try to tweet when I'm making stuff. I try to tweet what I'm making. And although if you look there, you'll see that there was the COVID pandemic made it a little bit hard for that. But hopefully things will be a little more active there. So yeah, those kind of places.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming along. This has been absolutely fascinating. And of course, thank you all our viewers for joining in.